The day I arrived at Blackwell Manor, an old woman looked me straight in the eye and said, "Be careful what you plant here, sweetheart. Some roots refuse to stay buried." At the time, I thought she was talking about flowers. I was wrong. The first thing I noticed about the estate was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you find in the countryside. This silence felt expensive, controlled, like even the wind needed permission before moving through the iron gates. My old pickup truck rattled down the long gravel driveway, passing rows of towering oak trees that seemed older than the country itself. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and stared at the mansion rising ahead of me. Blackwell Manor looked less like a home and more like a kingdom built from stone and secrets. I was 25 years old, covered in dust from a 6-hour drive, and carrying exactly 2 suitcases. One held clothes. The other held questions nobody had been able to answer for 15 years. Officially, I was there as a gardener. Unofficially, I was there because my mother vanished on that property when I was 10 years old. The story never made sense. A woman doesn't simply disappear without a trace. Not a woman like my mother. Not a woman who loved her daughter enough to leave behind letters, drawings, and promises about tomorrow. Yet tomorrow never came. Every investigation had ended the same way. No evidence. No witnesses. No answers. The only clue she left behind was a faded photograph of a white rose garden with 3 words written on the back. Blackwell Manor. For 15 years, those words followed me everywhere. Through foster homes. Through community college. Through every apartment I couldn't afford and every job that barely paid the bills. Eventually, I stopped waiting for answers to find me. I decided to find them myself. Which was exactly why I accepted a gardening position at one of the most exclusive private estates on the East Coast. The truck rolled to a stop beside a service entrance. Before I could get out, 2 luxury SUVs glided past me toward the front of the mansion. Their windows were dark enough to reflect the morning sun. Men in tailored suits stepped out first. Then came the guests. Wealthy people. Powerful people. The kind of people who never checked price tags and never waited in line. I looked down at my dirt-stained boots and suddenly felt very small. A woman carrying a clipboard appeared beside my door. "You're the new garden girl?" she asked. "Not Clara. Not Miss Bennett. Just garden girl." I nodded. "That's me." She barely glanced at me before handing over paperwork. "Stay out of the main house. Stay away from the guests. And whatever happens, don't touch the white roses." My heart skipped. "Why?" For the first time, she looked directly at me. "Because those belong to Mr. Blackwell." The name settled heavily in the air between us. Adrian Blackwell. I'd heard plenty about him before arriving. Billionaire. Businessman. Untouchable. Depending on who was talking, he was either a respected leader or a man powerful enough to make problems disappear before they ever reached the news. Nobody seemed to know where the truth ended and the rumors began. As I followed the stone pathway toward the gardens, I finally saw them. Hundreds of white roses stretching across the estate like fresh snow beneath the summer sun. Perfect. Untouched. Almost sacred. And standing at the center of them was a tall man in a black suit. His back faced me. One hand rested lightly against a bloom as if it mattered more than anything else in the world. I couldn't see his face. But for reasons I couldn't explain, every instinct told me the same thing. My life was about to change. I spent the rest of that morning trying not to look toward the center of the rose garden. It should have been easy. There were hundreds of plants that needed attention, dozens of flower beds lined with weeds, and enough work to keep both my hands and my mind occupied. But every few minutes, my eyes drifted back to the place where I had seen him standing. By noon, he was gone. Only the roses remained, moving gently beneath a warm summer breeze. I told myself I was relieved. People like Adrian Blackwell belonged in newspapers and whispered conversations, not in my daily life. The less I saw of him, the better. At least that was what I kept repeating in my head. The estate stretched across nearly 50 acres, and by my 3rd hour I realized something strange. No matter where I worked, someone always seemed to be watching. Security personnel moved quietly along distant pathways. Groundskeepers spoke in low voices and stopped talking whenever I approached. Even the house staff carried themselves differently, as if every action followed an invisible set of rules. The mansion did not feel like a home. It felt like a kingdom where everyone knew their place. Everyone except me. Around 1 o'clock, I took a short break beneath a maple tree near the greenhouse. I opened the lunch I had packed that morning and pulled out the old photograph from my backpack. The edges were worn from years of handling. My mother stood beside a row of white roses, smiling directly at the camera. Behind her, barely visible, was the outline of the same stone fountain I had passed earlier that morning. My chest tightened. 15 years. 15 years of questions with no answers. I traced her face with my thumb before sliding the photograph back into my bag. "You should not sit there." The voice startled me. I looked up to find an elderly groundskeeper standing a few feet away. He wore faded work gloves and carried a pair of pruning shears. "Why not?" I asked. He glanced toward the mansion before lowering his voice. "That is where the guests will arrive tomorrow." Guests? A very important event. Before I could ask another question, he simply nodded and walked away. The answer raised more questions than it solved. The afternoon passed slowly. Luxury vehicles began arriving before sunset. Workers decorated pathways with lanterns and floral arrangements. Caterers unloaded supplies through side entrances. Whatever was happening tomorrow was much larger than an ordinary party. As evening settled across the estate, golden light spilled across the gardens. I was gathering tools near the white roses when I noticed movement near the fountain. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, stood alone beside the water. She wore an expensive dress and looked completely lost. "Hey," I called gently. "Are you okay?" She turned toward me. Her eyes were bright with worry. "I cannot find my family." I walked closer and offered a reassuring smile. "Do you know their names?" Before she could answer, footsteps approached behind me. Several security guards appeared first. Then the atmosphere changed. It happened so quickly that I almost missed it. Conversations nearby stopped. Staff members straightened immediately. Even the guards seemed more alert. I turned and saw Adrian Blackwell walking toward us across the garden. The little girl's face lit up instantly. Without hesitation, she ran past me toward him. Adrian bent slightly as she reached him, speaking softly enough that I could not hear the words. For the first time, the powerful man from rumors and headlines looked almost human. Then his gaze lifted and met mine across the roses. Something unreadable flickered in his expression. Not recognition. Not surprise. Something deeper. And for reasons I could not explain, it felt as if he already knew exactly who I was. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the way Adrian Blackwell had looked at me across the roses. Not because it was romantic. It was not. It was unsettling. Like someone opening a book and already knowing how the story ended. By sunrise, the entire estate was moving. Trucks arrived through service entrances. Florists carried arrangements worth more than my monthly rent. Men in tailored suits spoke into earpieces while walking the grounds. Whatever event was happening tonight, it was important enough to transform the manor into something that looked straight out of a magazine. My assignment was simple. Stay in the gardens. Keep the flowers perfect. Stay invisible. I was good at invisible. At least I thought I was. The morning passed in a blur of work. White roses. Hydrangeas. Lavender borders. By noon, guests had already begun arriving. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. Women stepped out wearing designer dresses that probably cost more than my truck. Men wore watches that sparkled whenever sunlight hit them. I kept my head down and focused on trimming a row of hedges near the south terrace. That was when I heard laughter. Not friendly laughter. The kind designed to make sure someone else felt small. "Excuse me," a female voice called. I looked up. 3 women stood nearby holding champagne glasses. They were young, beautiful, and clearly wealthy. One of them pointed toward a flower arrangement. "You missed a spot." I glanced at the arrangement. It looked perfect. "I can check it again if you would like." The blonde woman smiled. How thoughtful. Her friends laughed. I returned to work. A few seconds later, another voice spoke. Imagine spending your entire life planting flowers for people who can actually enjoy them. More laughter. I told myself to ignore it. People like them had probably never spent a day worrying about rent or grocery bills. They lived in a different universe. But the words still stung. My mother used to say that dignity was not something other people gave you. It was something you carried yourself. So I kept working, kept my shoulders straight, kept my attention on the roses. Eventually, they wandered away in search of someone else to impress. The afternoon sun settled lower. Lanterns were being lit across the property. Music drifted from the mansion. I was carrying a basket of pruning tools toward the greenhouse when I noticed something strange. A section of the garden near the white roses had been closed off with decorative ropes. Guests were gathering there. Curious, I slowed my pace. At the center stood an enormous display of white roses unlike anything else on the estate. Hundreds of blooms arranged in a perfect circle around the fountain. The same fountain from my mother's photograph. My heartbeat quickened. I stepped closer. Not enough to attract attention. Just enough to see. Then I noticed a plaque beside the arrangement. The inscription was small, almost hidden beneath the flowers. I could only make out a few words from where I stood. In memory. Loyalty. Forever. A chill moved through me despite the warm evening air. Before I could get closer, someone spoke behind me. You should not be here. I turned. Adrian Blackwell stood only a few feet away. His voice was calm, controlled, but there was something sharp beneath it. My pulse stumbled. I was just looking, I said quietly. His eyes shifted toward the fountain. Then back to me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked a question that made every hair on my arm stand up. Clara, he said softly, where did you get your mother's photograph? For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The music from the party faded into the background. The voices, the laughter, the clinking glasses. All of it disappeared beneath a single question. How did he know about the photograph? I stared at Adrian Blackwell, searching his face for some sign that I had misunderstood him. There was none. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable, but his eyes never left mine. What did you just say? I asked quietly. A breeze moved through the roses between us. Lantern light flickered across the fountain. Around us, guests continued enjoying the evening, completely unaware that my entire world had just shifted. Adrian glanced toward the gathering crowd before looking back at me. This is not the place for this conversation. You know my mother? The question escaped before I could stop it. Something changed in his expression. Not guilt. Not surprise. Something closer to regret. Clara. He spoke my name carefully as if it carried weight. How long have you had that photograph? My pulse hammered against my ribs. Answer my question first. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then a woman approached from the party. She was elegant, confident, and dressed in a gown that probably cost more than my truck. Adrian, she said with a smile. Everyone is waiting for you. Her eyes shifted toward me. The smile immediately cooled. Oh, just one word. One tiny word that somehow made me feel like dirt on a designer shoe. Adrian did not introduce us. He did not explain why he had been speaking with a gardener in the middle of his event. Instead, he simply said, "Give me a few minutes." The woman looked surprised, then annoyed, but she nodded and walked away. I noticed several guests watching from a distance now. Curious, whispering, judging. The familiar feeling of being out of place settled over me again. I should go, I said. No, the response came immediately. Firm. Controlled. Not rude. Not loud. Just absolute. My stomach tightened. Adrian took a slow breath before speaking again. Your mother worked here. The words hit me harder than I expected. What? Years ago. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. You knew her? Yes. 15 years of questions. 15 years of dead ends. 15 years of wondering whether she had simply vanished from the world. And now a man standing beneath lantern light was casually confirming that he had known her. My voice shook despite my efforts to control it. Then tell me what happened. Adrian looked toward the fountain. The white roses. The memorial arrangement. The plaque. His jaw tightened slightly. Some truths are dangerous when they are incomplete. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it sounded impossible. You expect me to accept that? No, his gaze returned to mine. I expect you to be patient. Patience. 15 years had been nothing but patience. Before I could respond, movement near the mansion caught his attention. Several men in dark suits approached quickly. Not alarmed. Not rushed. But purposeful. One of them stopped beside Adrian and lowered his voice. I could not hear the words. Whatever was said caused Adrian's expression to harden. The atmosphere shifted instantly. He looked back at me. Go back to the staff quarters. What? Tonight. His voice remained calm. Do not leave the estate. Every instinct told me to demand answers. Instead, I noticed something unusual. For the first time since we started talking, Adrian Blackwell actually looked concerned. Not for himself. For me. Then he glanced toward the crowd, and I followed his gaze. Across the terrace, a silver-haired woman stood watching us. The moment our eyes met, she turned away. But not before I noticed one thing. She looked at me exactly the way someone looks at a ghost. I did not return to the staff quarters immediately. I told myself it was because I needed air. Because my thoughts were moving too fast to fit inside a small room. The truth was simpler. After 15 years of searching, I had finally found someone who knew my mother, and I was terrified that if I walked away, the answers would disappear again. The party continued long after sunset. Music floated across the estate. Warm light spilled from the mansion windows. Laughter echoed from the terraces. From a distance, Blackwell Manor looked magical. Up close, it felt like a stage where everyone was playing a role except me. I wandered along a stone pathway behind the greenhouse, carrying more questions than I could count. Adrian knew my mother. The silver-haired woman had reacted to me like she had seen a ghost. And somewhere beneath all of it was a secret large enough to make powerful people nervous. I stopped near a small garden pavilion overlooking the eastern lawn. The night air smelled of roses and freshly cut grass. For a few minutes, I simply listened to the fountain water in the distance. Then I heard voices. Instinctively, I stepped behind a row of hedges. 2 women were standing beneath the pavilion lights. One of them was the silver-haired woman from earlier. The other was younger, dressed in an elegant navy gown. This cannot continue, the younger woman said. He is becoming distracted. The older woman remained silent. She should never have been hired. My pulse quickened. They were talking about me. You know that, the younger woman continued. The resemblance alone is dangerous. Resemblance. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. The silver-haired woman finally spoke. There are things you do not understand. Then explain them. I cannot. A long silence followed. Then footsteps approached from another direction. The 2 women immediately stopped talking. I peeked through the leaves just in time to see Adrian entering the pavilion. The younger woman straightened instantly. Adrian. He barely acknowledged her. His attention moved directly to the older woman. We need to talk. Something in his tone made both women fall silent. The younger woman looked frustrated, but eventually left. Within seconds, only Adrian and the silver-haired woman remained. You should have told me, Adrian said quietly. There was never a right time. There should have been. The woman looked older suddenly. Tired. I was trying to protect everyone. Adrian shook his head. Secrets do not protect people forever. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid. They would hear it. Protect who? From what? Before either of them could say more, my phone slipped from my jacket pocket. It hit the stone path with a sharp crack. The sound seemed deafening. Both heads turned instantly. My blood froze. For one horrible second, nobody moved. Then Adrian started walking toward the hedges. I considered running. Instead, I stood there like an idiot while every possible explanation disappeared from my mind. A moment later, he stepped around the corner and found me. The silver-haired woman followed several feet behind him. Neither looked surprised. Almost as if they had expected this. Clara, Adrian said calmly. How much did you hear? Not enough, I admitted. The silver-haired woman's expression softened. She studied my face carefully. Her eyes shimmered with something that looked suspiciously like sadness. "You have her eyes," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "You knew my mother too?" The woman nodded slowly. "Very well." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. 15 years of silence. 15 years of dead ends. And now two people standing in front of me were confirming that my mother had not been forgotten. Adrian glanced toward the brightly lit mansion in the distance. His expression darkened slightly. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will finally learn why she came here." Then his gaze shifted toward the upper floor windows of the manor. Assuming we are not already too late. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds and restless anticipation. I woke before sunrise, unable to shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. The manor was unusually quiet. The music was gone. The guests had retreated behind closed doors. Even the gardens seemed to be holding their breath. I spent the first hour tending the white roses, trying to focus on work instead of questions. It did not help. Every flower reminded me of my mother. Every pathway reminded me that someone here knew the truth. Around 8 o'clock, a black sedan rolled slowly across the estate and stopped near the main greenhouse. Several staff members immediately stepped aside. A moment later, Adrian emerged. He was dressed simply compared to the night before. No crowd. No formal event. No audience. Just him. For some reason, that version of Adrian felt even more intimidating. He walked directly toward me. "Come with me," he said. No explanation. No greeting. I set down my gardening gloves and followed. We crossed a section of the property I had not seen before. The path wound behind a grove of oak trees and eventually opened onto a secluded garden hidden from the rest of the estate. The moment I saw it, I stopped walking. White roses. Hundreds of them. Older than the ones near the fountain. Some of the bushes looked decades old. The air smelled sweet and familiar. My chest tightened. "My mother was here," I whispered. Adrian nodded. "Many times." I stepped closer to one of the rose bushes. A small metal plaque stood beside it. The inscription was weathered but readable. Eleanor Bennett. My knees nearly gave out. Seeing her name there felt different from hearing stories. Different from photographs. It was real. Tangible. Proof that she had existed in this place. Proof that she mattered. I reached out and touched the edge of the plaque. "Why is her name here?" Adrian remained silent for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "Because she helped save my family." I turned toward him. "What does that mean?" He exhaled slowly. "Years ago, before I inherited this estate, before most of the people who work here ever arrived, your mother discovered something that protected people she barely knew. She could have walked away. Instead, she stayed. And then she disappeared." Adrian's expression darkened. "Yes." The word hung between us. Heavy. Incomplete. Frustrating. I wanted details. Answers. Dates. Names. Instead, I was getting fragments. Pieces of a puzzle with the center missing. Before I could push further, footsteps approached from behind us. The silver-haired woman entered the garden carrying a small wooden box. She looked nervous. More nervous than I had seen her before. "It is time," she said quietly. Adrian studied the box before nodding. The woman carried it toward me. My hands trembled as I accepted it. The wood was old. Scratched. Familiar in a way I could not explain. "What is this?" I asked. The woman's eyes filled with emotion. "Your mother asked that it be given to you one day." My heartbeat thundered in my ears. 15 years. 15 years of silence. And now I was holding something that had belonged to her. I carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested a faded journal, a silver key, and a sealed envelope with my name written across the front in my mother's handwriting. Beneath the envelope was a single handwritten sentence. "If Clara is reading this, then the garden remembers." My hands would not stop shaking. The envelope felt impossibly light for something that carried 15 years of questions inside it. I stared at my name written in my mother's handwriting, and suddenly I was 10 years old again, sitting at a kitchen table while she packed my school lunch and reminded me to chase big dreams. For a moment, I could not open it. I was afraid. Afraid the answers would hurt. Afraid there would not be enough answers. Afraid that after spending half my life searching, the truth would somehow feel smaller than the mystery. Adrian remained silent beside me. The silver-haired woman stood a few steps away, giving me space. Neither of them rushed me. Finally, I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper had yellowed with age, but the words were still clear. Dear Clara, if you are reading this, then things happened exactly the way I prayed they would. First, I need you to know something important. I never abandoned you. I read that line 3 times. My vision blurred immediately. A lump formed in my throat so quickly I could barely breathe. I continued reading. Every decision I made was to protect you. One day you will hear many versions of what happened here. Some will be incomplete. Some will be wrong. Trust your heart before you trust rumors. And trust the garden. The garden remembers everything. I lowered the letter for a second and looked at Adrian. He said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on the roses. I continued. There is a key inside the box. It opens a place hidden beneath the old greenhouse. What you find there belongs to you now. It contains the truth I could never safely explain. When the time comes, do not face it alone. Some people kept their promises to me. One of them is standing beside you now. My eyes lifted toward Adrian again. He finally looked back at me. For the first time since arriving at Blackwell Manor, I saw something unexpected in his expression. Not power. Not authority. Grief. The kind that never fully leaves. I looked back down at the letter. The final lines were shorter. Simpler. Clara, if you ever doubt yourself, remember this. Flowers grow toward light even after the harshest winter. So do people. I love you. Always. Mom. Silence settled over the garden. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. My chest ached, but not in the same way it had for years. The emptiness was still there. Yet now it had shape. Meaning. A direction. The silver-haired woman wiped at the corner of one eye. She wrote that during her final week here, she said softly. You were all she talked about. I swallowed hard. Why did nobody tell me? The woman's expression faltered. Because we believed we were protecting you. Before I could respond, a sharp sound echoed from the direction of the mansion. Not an alarm. More like a sudden commotion. Raised voices. Doors opening. Adrian's posture changed instantly. He turned toward the estate. Several security personnel appeared on a nearby path and began moving quickly toward the main house. One of them approached Adrian directly. Sir, the man said quietly. There is a problem. Adrian listened for several seconds. The color drained from the silver-haired woman's face. What happened? She asked. The guard hesitated. Someone entered the West Wing archive. My pulse jumped. Adrian's eyes narrowed. How much was taken? We do not know yet. The guard glanced toward me. Just briefly. But it was enough. Enough to make my stomach tighten. Adrian noticed it too. Say it, he said. The guard exhaled slowly. The only files disturbed were the ones connected to Eleanor Bennett. The garden suddenly felt colder. Someone else had been searching for my mother's secrets. And unlike me, they already knew exactly where to look. Everything moved faster after that. Within minutes, the quiet garden had transformed into a place of urgent conversations and guarded expressions. Security personnel crossed the estate in every direction. Staff members whispered behind closed doors. The atmosphere that had once felt elegant now felt fragile, as if the entire manor were balancing on top of a secret that could no longer stay buried. Adrian took the journal, the key, and the envelope from the wooden box and carefully returned them to me. Keep these with you, he said. Do not leave them unattended. I nodded. The seriousness in his voice made it impossible to argue. We returned to the mansion together. As we walked, I noticed people staring. Some recognized Adrian. Others recognized me as the gardener who somehow kept appearing beside him. The looks ranged from curiosity to confusion. I ignored them all. My attention remained fixed on the questions spinning through my mind. Who had entered the archive? Why were they interested in my mother? And what exactly was hidden beneath the greenhouse? The moment we entered the West Wing, I understood why everyone seemed unsettled. Several archive cabinets stood open. Papers covered a long wooden table. Nothing looked damaged, but everything looked disturbed. Someone had searched carefully, deliberately. Adrian moved through the room with quiet focus, while I remained near the doorway. The silver-haired woman joined us a few moments later. "Was anything taken?" she asked. One of the staff members shook his head. "Not that we can tell." Adrian stopped beside a cabinet and pulled open a drawer. Empty folders sat neatly inside. "They were looking for information," he said. "Not valuables." His gaze shifted toward me. And they knew exactly where to start. A chill traveled down my spine. Whoever had done this knew about my mother long before I arrived. The realization was unsettling. I had spent years believing I was the only person searching for answers. Clearly, I had been wrong. An hour later, after the archive had been secured, Adrian finally led me toward the greenhouse mentioned in my mother's letter. The structure sat on the far edge of the property, partially hidden behind mature hedges and climbing ivy. It looked ordinary from the outside. Old glass panels. Weathered brick. Nothing remarkable. Yet the moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The strange certainty that my mother had stood in this exact place years ago. Sunlight filtered through dusty panes overhead. Rows of dormant planting tables stretched across the room. Everything appeared normal until Adrian pointed toward the stone floor near the back wall. "Use the key," he said. I knelt beside an iron hatch almost completely concealed beneath a workbench. My hands trembled as I inserted the silver key. The lock clicked immediately. Too easily. As though it had been waiting. The hatch opened to reveal a narrow staircase descending beneath the greenhouse. Cool air drifted upward. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Adrian reached for a lantern mounted nearby and switched it on. "You do not have to do this today," he said quietly. I looked down into the darkness. 15 years of questions waited below. 15 years of wondering what happened to my mother. 15 years of searching. I met his eyes. "Yes," I said softly. "I do." Together, we descended the stairs. At the bottom stood a small underground room lined with shelves. Boxes. Journals. Photographs. Records. Evidence of a story someone had spent years preserving. Then I saw the photograph resting alone on a wooden desk. It showed my mother standing beside Adrian's father. Both were smiling. And written across the bottom in faded ink were 5 words that changed everything. "Partners in the Rose Foundation." For a long moment, I could only stare at the photograph. My mother stood beside Adrian's father beneath an arch of white roses, both smiling at something outside the frame. They did not look like strangers. They looked like people who trusted each other completely. My fingers traced the faded words at the bottom of the picture. "Partners in the Rose Foundation." What was the Rose Foundation? I asked. Adrian picked up a weathered journal from the desk and opened it carefully. "It was never meant to be public," he said. "My father created it to help families who had nowhere else to turn. Scholarships, housing assistance, medical support, quiet acts of kindness. Your mother helped build it." I looked around the underground room. The shelves were filled with records, photographs, handwritten notes, and letters from people whose lives had clearly been changed. This was not a secret empire. It was a secret legacy. The silver-haired woman joined us a few minutes later carrying another box. Inside were dozens of letters addressed to my mother. Thank you notes. Holiday cards. Photographs of families standing in front of new homes. Children holding graduation certificates. Evidence that her work had mattered. That she had mattered. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. For so many years, I had imagined endless possibilities. Tragedies. Mysteries. Questions without answers. The truth was different. My mother had spent her final years protecting something beautiful. Then why hide all of this? I asked quietly. The silver-haired woman sat across from me. Because after your mother's disappearance, people began fighting over control of the foundation. Your mother feared that if the records were exposed too soon, everything she and Mr. Blackwell built would be destroyed. She asked us to preserve it until the right person came. I looked down at the letter in my hands. Me. The woman smiled through tears. You. Hours passed underground. I read journals. studied photographs, learned stories I should have known years ago. Piece by piece, the emptiness I had carried for half my life began to heal. Not because every question was answered. Some mysteries remained. Life rarely offers perfect endings. But I finally understood who my mother had been. More importantly, I understood why she had chosen this place. By sunset, we emerged from beneath the greenhouse. The sky glowed gold across the gardens. The white roses swayed gently in the evening breeze. For the first time since arriving at Blackwell Manor, the estate no longer felt intimidating. It felt familiar, almost welcoming. Adrian walked beside me in comfortable silence. We stopped near the fountain where this journey had truly begun. "What happens now?" I asked. He looked across the gardens. "That depends on you." "How?" "The foundation belongs to its mission," he said. "But your mother left instructions. She wanted you to decide its future." I laughed softly in disbelief. A week earlier I had been a gardener searching for clues. Now I was standing in the middle of a legacy larger than I ever imagined. That sounds terrifying. A rare smile appeared on Adrian's face. Most worthwhile things are. The last rays of sunlight painted the roses gold. Around us, staff members prepared for another evening at the manor. Somewhere in the distance, I heard children laughing. Life continuing. Growing. Just as my mother would have wanted. I looked at the garden one final time and understood what her letter truly meant. The garden remembered because people remembered. Acts of kindness remembered. Promises remembered. Love remembered. Some roots refused to stay buried because they were never meant to disappear. They were meant to bloom again. And as the evening breeze carried the scent of white roses across the estate, I finally felt something I had not felt in 15 years. Home.